Welcome to the Legalpreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Sager, founder and CEO of Legalpreneur Inc. As a serial entrepreneur and someone that works exclusively with small business owners legally protecting their business, I'm dedicated to covering common legal issues faced by business owners, providing you with the business knowledge you need to catapult your business's growth and showing you just how some of the world's most elite entrepreneurs have handled these legal and business issues themselves. In true attorney fashion, the information in this episode is not legal advice. This is for informational purposes only, and you should always consult with your attorney before implementing any of the information in the show. Hey there, welcome back to another episode of the Legalpreneur Podcast. I have an amazing guest for you today, Chaix McDonough. She is an amazing business owner. She's a coach, she has a podcast, she does all the things, and I'm very, very excited for you guys to hear from her today. So thank you so much for joining me, Lee.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, so I like to start these podcasts all the same. Like, give everybody the rundown. Who are you? How did you get to where you are today? And tell the world how amazing you are.
Well, I will do my best. So, my name is Chaix McDonough. I'm the founder of Coach with Clarity, which is a training and education company for life and business coaches. And coaching is really my second career, as I think it probably is for most coaches out there. Before I was a coach, I was and still am a licensed clinical social worker. Though I'm no longer practicing as a therapist, I did so for almost 15 years. So my background is in social work and public health. At the time, my husband was in the Air Force, so we moved around quite a bit, and I was able to really get a strong lay of the land when it came to therapy because I got to serve so many different populations. But when he got out of the Air Force in 2015 and we moved back to the United States after being stationed in Germany for 4 years, which was amazing, I knew that I wanted to continue to serve people. But I didn't want to do it through mental health. I was looking for a different way. I was looking to serve different people. And a whole bunch of stuff happened in our transition out of military life into civilian life that essentially introduced me to coaching and business coaching in particular via my husband, who had bought a dental practice. He's a periodontist. And as I'm sure you're familiar with, being an attorney, me being a therapist, him being a dentist, it's one thing to practice your skills. It's quite another to own a business around that. And the Air Force, he didn't have to do that kind of business work in the Air Force. So he was really learning as he went along. And it was hard. It was hard for all of us. And I kept thinking, there's got to be someone out there who can support people like my husband who don't have a mental health diagnosis, who don't necessarily need therapy, but who would still benefit from support. That's where I kind of got introduced to coaching. And I realized this could be it for me too. Like, I'm feeling really drawn to this. So I completed a coach training program, started my business, focusing primarily on supporting therapists and healthcare providers in private practice as they built and grow their businesses. But interestingly, the more I did that, the more my clients asked me, how did you become a coach? Tell me about this coaching thing. Do you think I could do coaching too? And that's what introduced me to what is now Coach with Clarity, where we provide both initial training and continuing education for coaches who want to go out there and serve the world.
That's incredible. Oh my God. There's so many areas I would love to dive into. So, first, I want to touch on the training that you did to become a coach. Why did you go through that training? And did you say you got certified?
Hmm. Yes.
So I'm very curious what drew you to that and how you found this particular program because I mean, we all know like there's a new coach every 5 minutes in the online business world. Many do not go the route of a certification, and not that it's needed, but it definitely gives you more credibility because like we know anybody can call themselves a coach. So I'm very curious like why did you go that route?
You're exactly anyone can call themselves a coach. Many people do. And, in many ways, I appreciate that the coaching industry doesn't have so many gates to keep people out.
Mhm.
I mean, there really is opportunity for anyone to become a successful coach and have a thriving business. But just because you're good at giving advice, just because maybe you've worked with a coach in the past, doesn't necessarily mean you have all the skills you need to be a really powerful coach. And even as someone with a strong background as a therapist, I knew that there was a difference between therapy and coaching, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. And also, as a license holder, I wanted to make sure that if I was going to be practicing as a coach, I also had a coaching credential that I could point to and say, no, I'm trained, I'm credentialed, I know what I'm doing, and I'm not working under my license. Like, therapy is over here, coaching's over here, and here's all of the training and proof to show that, yes, I am operating as an entirely different type of profession. So that was one reason that I pursued a coach training program. The other, to be honest with you, is because I'm someone who, when I do something, I go all in. And if I'm going to do it, like, I want it to be the best. And so to me, having that credential from the International Coaching Federation, that's the gold standard, and so I wanted it. So that's kind of my ambitious streak shining through a little bit. But I also knew that because of my background and because of my license, it would also provide that additional level of protection, in case anything ever went south in the future.
Yeah, and that's such a important indicator because a lot of people come to me and they're like, "Hey, should I, how do I find a coach to work with?" And it's so hard to answer because at this point, like anybody can be a coach. And
Yeah.
I appreciate what you said because you're right. Even as a practicing lawyer, it sucks that we have so much red tape around everything, which I understand. But we have so many rules we have to follow. And as a coach, there's really no rules, but that's where it gets tricky for people because they don't, it's like, how do I trust this person? And normally what I tell people is, hey, number one, either look to see if they have a certain certification, and, whatever their certification is, go look at that certification to see what their requirements
Yes.
are. Because especially in my practice, I work with a ton of business coaches, and I tell a lot of them, "Hey, you should look into creating your own certification." And as I also preach this, I also know the other side of it when I'm telling clients, "Hey, go look for this certification." But I also know, like, how, not that it's easy, but I know how it is a lower barrier to entry as well as being a licensed therapist or a licensed attorney. It's a much lower barrier to even have a certification program. So there's a lot of things you need to vet. So personally, whenever somebody comes to me and asks for a coach, I tell them either look for a certification or look at their business success. So,
I think that's sage guidance. I really do. I think, and to your point, that really research the credential that they are advertising.
yeah.
Because you and I both know there are some platforms where you can pay $9 and watch a 30-minute video, and boom, you're certified as a
Mhm.
coach. That's very different than someone who's completed 60, 125, 200 hours of coach training and who has had to work with a certain number of clients and provide verification through an oral exam and a written exam that they are skilled in coaching proficiencies. So it really is on the consumer to do their research and to figure out what it is they're getting, because not all certifications are created equal. And there are several excellent organizations out there that do provide some level of coach credentialing. I've gone with the International Coaching Federation, and the Center for Credentialing and Education, because those two are pretty much the strongest in my industries. And they take their position of ensuring that these coaches are out there really serving the public. They take that very seriously. And so that's something that I wanted to be a part of as well. So my programs are ICF accredited, and that is important to me. I should say, though, of course, there's a huge caveat that just because someone has a credential doesn't mean they're perfect, doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be the right fit. And also, there are plenty of coaches out there who are not credentialed, who are excellent at what they do. So that's why, in addition to those certifications, take the time to get to know the person behind the website or behind the brand. Don't just look at their testimonials. See if you can talk to people who've actually worked with them. Really, at the end of the day, I think word of mouth is probably the most powerful way to verify that the coach you want to work with is someone who's going to be a good fit for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love what you said about testimonials because even as we gather testimonials, we know how real they are, but we also see, like, we could literally make up anything that we wanted in a testimonial.
Yeah.
So, testimonials aren't the only thing you should go by at all. So, in your coaching specifically, do you look for a certain client or do you have a certain method that you like to teach? Can you tell us a little bit more about your specific coaching?
Yes. So part of the reason why I started my business, Coach with Clarity, and then eventually did an initial certification program was because I was seeing a lack of focus on coaching for all people. A lot of the coach training programs that I've seen, a lot of the training I received was very much kind of centered in this upper class white male perspective. And it really came to a head, I think, in May of 2020, when right after the murder of George Floyd, and when we were still are going through what I think is a reckoning when it comes to civil rights. And I found that a lot of the training programs out there were pretty silent when it came to issues of racial justice. And that bothered me. And I just thought, I'm still learning. I'm still very much on my journey through anti-racism, and I'm working with my own people to do that kind of work. And I want to see reflected in the work that I'm doing. How can I weave this into my programs? How can I ensure that the coaches that I'm working with and training have that perspective as well? And it was at that point where I was like, you know what, Lee, it is time for you to create your own certification. And I made the decision to consult and then bring in outside coaches to do that diversity, equity, and inclusion training. Because as a cisgendered white woman, I'm not the person people need to be hearing from when it comes to
Mhm.
issues of DEI. I need to be out there talking about it, yes, and I need to be amplifying voices. But when it comes to actually doing the training, I don't think it needs to come from me. It needs to come from compensated trainers who have professional and lived experience when it comes to this. And so that's something that's really important to me and something that I include in my programming. Now, when it comes to actually coaching, I do have my own coaching approach. I call it keyhole coaching, and that's kind of my format for a typical coaching session. And there's all sorts of things that I teach in my program to really help people understand how to create the coaching relationship, how to create the container for that session, and the ways in which we can partner with and co-create with our clients to help them really achieve their fullest potential.
Nice. I love that. And I love how you include the diversity stuff because even me being Hispanic, I don't feel like I'm in an adequate place to even discuss racial inequality because even though, yes, Hispanics are treated differently than white people, it's still different than how black people are treated. And I actually was asked to speak a couple of times. I'm like, honestly, I don't feel like unfortunately, like I think it's you know, reflects poorly on me, I don't feel I was in a place to speak on those issues. So kudos to you for going out and seeking those people because it is something so incredibly critical to the world today and even the business world. As a small business owner, you need to realize how this affects you because even with the racial inequality, whether it's Black people, Hispanics, Asians, whatever it is, you don't wanna only attract one type of client, like, or I mean, I'm sure some people do, but as a business owner that wants to scale and grow, you need to learn how to address these issues. Because I know there was, several business influencers that got called out for either not making a statement or making the wrong statement, and I applaud those that made an effort, but
Mhm.
unless we are very active in put making that change and educating ourselves, then nothing's ever going to change. So that's huge on your part. So I applaud you for that. That's big.
Well, I do appreciate that. Thank you. But at the same time, it's not a one and done thing. And I still have a long way to go in my own journey. And my program still has areas where it can develop as well. And I think that's the thing about anti-racist work is that it doesn't end. And we have to commit to that over and over again and recognize the structures that are in place that may be hidden or that we're not really fully aware of, but those structures are there to continue to support patriarchy and white supremacy. And so how can we dismantle those? And I think in the coaching industry it's especially important to do that kind of work, because so much of coaching is about helping people identify their vision and creating a plan to bring all of that to life. But if we make the assumption that everyone's on the same playing field, that we all have the same level of access, then we're really doing a disservice to our clients who don't. And that's something that I know I've seen it, I'm sure you have too. It can be this kind of toxic positivity movement where it's like, just dream it and it will be, and you have everything you need to create the change that you want. The shadow side of that is, and if you're not creating that change, it's your fault. And so we really need to parse that out and say, well, okay, yes, each individual person does need to contribute to their own success. And we need to be mindful of any social or environmental barriers that are there that are making it more difficult for some people to access that. How do we do that? And how do we coach our clients to create that change while understanding the barriers that they may be experiencing in their own lives? There's a lot there, and it's a very nuanced discussion. And it's a discussion that, quite honestly, was not happening in the training program I went to. And I hope that I can be a part of that conversation moving forward.
Well, I know that you're doing an amazing job already. So I'm really really proud of what you've done so far and the activeness that you're already putting into everything. So, great job. One thing that I also want to ask about is being in the military or being a
Mhm.
military spouse. I know how tough that can be, especially when you have a license, because a lot of times your license
Yes,
is only for one state. So how did that work
correct.
when you guys were constantly moving around?
That was a bit of a challenge, especially early on when I was pre licensed and I was trying to complete all of my supervision, because we wound up PCSing or moving from Texas to Florida halfway through my
Oh,
supervision.
no.
So I
Oh,
had, yeah, that was a challenge. And this is where being a bit of a pack rat rather, really saved me, because when we moved from Texas to Florida, I essentially inundated the Florida board with all sorts of paperwork. Every time I had met with my clinical supervisor in Texas, we documented it. So we had the date, the time, and the bullet point topics that we discussed during our supervision sessions. So I had a really detailed record of all of the sessions I had already completed. I had detailed records about my work hours, where I worked, the type of work that I was doing. So then I was able to essentially ask their permission to, will you accept these hours towards Florida licensure? And they said yes. And I know it's because I was really thorough in the documentation. So definitely for those of you who are navigating licensure, keep good records. Don't throw anything away, including all of your syllabi from your graduate programs, because when it came time for me to apply for licensure, I had to submit all of my syllabi because my university had changed the course
oh.
titles and numbers. So nothing on my syllabus, nothing on my transcript matched current. It was such a headache. But because I had those syllabi, I was okay. So I know it seems like a lot, but don't throw those things out. They actually are valuable and they will help you in the long run.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like a huge headache. But so
It was.
whenever you guys moved to different states, did you have to get licensed in every single state?
I did. So I got licensed in Texas, and then that was a LMSW, so that was like the preclinical license. Then we moved to Florida. I was able to get licensed there. From Florida, we went to Germany, and when we were in Germany, I actually worked on base first as a contractor and then as a federal government employee. And so, because I was licensed in a state, that was sufficient.
Mm,
And when you are a federal employee, if you're in
yeah.
the GS system, you just need a state license. So that was nice. But then when we moved from Germany back to North Carolina, yes, I had to get a license here in North Carolina. I don't have my Texas license anymore. I still have my Florida and my North Carolina ones. Those are going to be on inactive though, since I'm not currently practicing, but I'm just not quite ready to fully like shut that down yet.
Yeah, same here. I mean, as we're going through the transition, we're gonna be shutting down the law firm, but I'm not ready to like give up my legal license yet. It's like, this is
Yeah.
something I worked hard for, so I'll probably still stay licensed for a while at least. But I was actually a military spouse as well. I got lucky though and only got licensed I in one state and then which is actually a big reason why I specialize or mainly did trademarks because that's federal law, and you only have to be licensed in a state. So, yep, so federal law, that's what helps us out. So, how have you implemented the legal stuff in your business?
Well, number one, I learned I won't say the hard way, but I will say that I didn't set up my business properly to begin with. I had one LLC and it was a PLLC because in North Carolina, that's what you have when you have a license. And so it was associated with my license, but yet it was my coaching business. And very quickly I realized this is not smart. this is this is like fast track to possibly jeopardizing my license because I was working with coaching clients all over the country, all over the world really, but operating through a business entity that was associated with my state license. And so I realized this is not going to work. And so fortunately, like I figured that out pretty early on and I created a separate LLC for my coaching and consulting and education work. And eventually I closed the PLLC because I wasn't practicing as a therapist. So that was kind of one big aha moment for me and why I'm so adamant in when I talk about it on my podcast or in my membership or with my clients. Please, please keep your businesses separate. I know it feels like a headache. I know it feels like you're duplicating efforts, and it would be just so easy to have one website and one business entity. But when your license is on the line, if you're doing any sort of work outside of your license, it really needs to be in its own area. So that was kind of like my number one business lesson or legal lesson when I first started out.
Yeah, and that's a big thing what we talk about whenever we're doing, whether it's the podcast or any type of education, because the most one of the most frequently asked questions we get is, "Hey, I have these businesses. Should I have them under one entity or should I separate them out?" And my overarching like general answer is, well, let's look at the levels of risk. Because if they're very similar,
Mm-hmm.
and how I compare it is we work with a bunch of clothing boutiques, and if they're selling retail and then they branch into wholesale, getting started, it's fine. They're very similar risk levels, so that to keep those under the same entity, that's fine. But if you have a clothing boutique and then you have real estate, or like you and like many other people, you have a license, then you start a different branch of it. If it is something that does not need a license, 100% keep those separate because that is, like you said, it is potentially a huge headache in the making.
Yes. Yes. So and really all of this is about risk mitigation, right? And so why set yourself up for greater risk than you need to? And so if you can start as you mean to go on, but if you get into it like I did, it's never too late to like backtrack and figure it out and go forward in a way that's going to really minimize your risk. I'd say the second legal thing that I learned was you have to have a contract in place. If you are exchanging money for goods or services, have some sort of agreement to protect you. And I know like you've got such a resource within your contract vault to help
Yeah.
make that happen. I have found your contracts to be very helpful. But one of my first coaches actually said, "Oh no, I don't use a contract with my clients because it's really off-putting. All of that, legal language, it doesn't build trust with your client." And I remember thinking to myself, well, N no, like, I'm not gonna do that. I'm opening myself up for risk, and actually having a strong contract protects everyone involved,
Mhm.
both the coach and the client, and so when you explain that and you explain how it serves the client too, you can use that as a way to build trust. So yeah, definitely second piece was get that contract in place.
Yeah, and especially as a business owner, I was gonna say as a service provider, but even as a business owner in general, the number one reason that it helps the business owner is to protect them from chargebacks, because most payment
Mhm.
processors, if there's an issue or if there's a chargeback, that's the number one thing they look for is there a signed contract here? Because if so, it's like, okay, they agreed to this. Like that's kind of a slam dunk right there. So it always riles me up when I hear, especially a coach, because some coaches they don't, I know they don't mean to, but they give legal advice when obviously they're not in a place that they should be giving legal advice, because it actually is the UPL, unauthorized practice of law, and they could get in trouble. But not that I would ever like blatantly like out somebody for saying, "Hey, don't use a contract," but that is actually legal advice. So anytime anybody asks you, whether you're as a coach or in any place in business, "Hey, should I do this for my business?" If it has anything to do with legal stuff, I would suggest not answering it at all because it could be construed as legal advice. So, but that being said, always use a contract.
Yes, please. Please, please, please.
Yeah. Anything else? Any other legal stuff that you've been able to implement in your business?
I think the third piece is how important it is to protect your intellectual property and to do so early. I think a lot of us, or maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I do know some of my clients as well, they view their intellectual property as, well, yes, I mean, I created this, but like it's based on other work. And so it's not really mine. And so like I'll just, no, if you've gone through the time and energy and money to create something, protect that IP, whether it's you're trademarking your brand name or copywriting your book, like whatever it is, take the time to do that because it will offer you protection in the long run. And I have had cases where someone has used a phrase that I've copyrighted, or I'm sorry, that I've trademarked rather. And I've been able to go to them and say, you may not be aware, but this phrase is trademarked for this purpose. You're using it for that same purpose. You need to stop. Usually that's enough.
Yeah.
But sometimes you do send a cease and desist. Sometimes you do need to follow up. But when you trademark it, if there's any sort of monetary compensation that you might be entitled to, like that helps you do that. So I'm all about like protecting your intellectual property. And I know you are too. I know like just you know more about this than I do, but I know that you would support that as well.
Absolutely. I love to hear it from you. I love to hear it from the guests when they know, hey, this protection, that protection. It's music to my ears. So before we wrap up, I like to ask the same question to all of my guests, and that is for just
Mhm.
one overarching, like your number one business tip.
Yes. I really thought about this one and I have kind of a I don't know if it's my number one, but I think it's really important and I wish I had done this earlier in my business. So, if there's something that you're doing like a system that you have and most of us we're using our laptops or our desktops to do it, screen record what you are doing. Even if it's something simple like publishing a blog post, go ahead and do a screen recording of all of the steps and processes because one day you are going to want to outsource some of this. And if you have screen recordings that show someone your process and how it works, it makes onboarding team members so much easier. I've done it with my podcast. I've done it with all sorts of things. So that's my number one tip. And do it before you need to. Do it before you think or even thinking about hiring someone. Just have that in your arsenal. It'll save you so much time. And then when you're making standard operating procedures, SOPs, you can reference your recordings and so forth to make it easier for everyone involved.
Yes, that is genius. That is such a good tip. Seriously, like so practical too. Very, very good advice. Love it. All right, Lee,
Oh,
tell
well, thank you. Thank
everybody
you.
about your podcast. Where can they find you? Where can they find all things Chaix McDonough?
Yes, well, I would love to connect with people over at coachwithclarity.com. That's my website and kind of the hub for where you can find out information about everything that I offer, including my podcast, the Coach with Clarity podcast. It drops every Monday, and that's where we explore both the art and business of coaching. So we've got some episodes that are about coaching skills, others that are more business oriented. We have interviews and coaching calls. It's a show that I love. I'm really proud of. We're coming up on almost 2 years, which is pretty
That's awesome.
exciting.
Congrats.
So you can learn. Thank you. Thank you. So you can learn more about the podcast over at my website. It's also available pretty much on any podcast platform. All you have to do is search for Coach with Clarity. And I'm also over on Instagram at Coach with Clarity. So you can send me a DM and we can connect over there.
Perfect. I love it. Thank you so much, Lee. And you guys, seriously, go check out all her stuff. It'll be in the show notes, and we will see you next time. Here at Legalpreneur, we're committed to providing a supportive legal community for all business owners. I know how scary the legal stuff can be. If you found this information helpful, I would be so grateful if you could share it with a fellow business owner. And quite frankly, it doesn't cost anything to rate, review, or subscribe to the show. Your support helps me reach more listeners, which allows me to support more business owners in their entrepreneurial journey. Have any questions or comments about the show? Feel free to drop me a line on Instagram. I promise I read all of the messages and comments. And if you want to be a guest on the show or know someone that would make a great guest, simply fill out our application form and a team member will reach out if we think it's a good fit. I'll see you in the next episode.